Welcome to Conscious Change Agent Web Show Part 3 with my guest here, Joe Kittel. We're talking about spirituality and business in this section. So you talk a lot about using spiritual principles in business and strategic alliance. That's the topic of your book. What's your experience of how that's received? You know, are we in the age of being able to talk openly about spiritual principles in business?
I mean, I think we are. I look at organizations like Conscious Capitalism, in the book Megatrends 2010, the subtitle is "The Rise of Conscious Capitalism," and it said, spirituality in business works.
Yep.
And I think in the world of business, people might not use spiritual words, but I think they're practicing the ideas of spirituality about. Yeah. Doing good, being of service, being of value. Remember when I was writing my book, literally I had a book appear on my doorstep. It was called The Corporate Mystic by Gay Hendricks and Kate Ludeman. Okay. And the first line in the book says, if you want to find a true mystic, you're better off finding one in a corporate boardroom than you are in a monastery or a cathedral.
Why is that?
Because this stuff works. And it works everywhere. And I would say, I've dealt a lot with people in the executive level, people in the boardroom. It's interesting because I see the fulfillment of New Testament scripture that says you can't serve two masters. Because what I see in those rooms are evidence of the cream and the scum rising to the top. So you can be a loving, serving, doing good, connected person, and it'll work for you. Or you can be a pure-blooded asshole, egotistical, you against the world, and it'll work for you. I wouldn't like that life, but it'll work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of who you become in leading that life.
So, I think spirituality, I used to think that it was a desert I was bringing water into, but now I've come to realize they're just like people. They just need to wake up to the truth that's already there.
Yeah.
They need to wake up to the truth behind the ideas that they've already been practicing and understand why they work.
Mm. So what do you say to the sort of idea of render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, which would talk about, if you like, a sort of separation between a spiritual realm and then a kind of realm of power and politics and maybe even business? Do you think that's an old idea?
I think separating religion from government and state is good. Keeping those two organizations separate. But personally, I don't think there's a need to separate spiritual ideas, spiritual principles and practices from our day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And I don't think they need to be done in a way that are, cramming ideas down their throat. I'm not interested in being a missionary or a zealot. I'm just interested in the same success they are. I just think I've got some ideas that are helpful.
Yeah. And is there any difference between the corporate world and the entrepreneurial world? In some ways, we're in the age of the entrepreneur. More and more people going self-employed, solopreneurs, personal brand businesses.
Well, I think what we're about is a fundamental sea change in the world of business. And I think when those things happen, it's harder for the large corporations to change, to redo their culture. So I think that the best place for these ideas are small and medium-sized businesses, or companies who've grown up recently, like Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or the Container Store. But I've worked with a couple of small companies, and I think it's to the individual. People are receptive, and part of it may be self-serving because I'm very clear about what I'm about.
Yes.
And so if people are aligned with that, they work with me.
Yeah.
So, but I think the hope and promise is with new companies, because then they can incorporate these things.
Mm. So talk to me a little bit about competition and the role of competition. Is there a role for healthy competition? It's one of the things that, again, seems to get put out there a lot as an idea, is that if only we were less competitive and more cooperative, the world would be a radically better place. Is there a role for competition in terms of excellence and driving standards? Or is the whole paradigm of competition completely obsolete?
Well, I think we can have a whole interesting discussion on balance. I'm not sure about the role of balance. But in this case, I think there is a role for a certain degree of competition. And, I think back to, I worked for Hewlett-Packard, and Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard used to have the idea that they never really wanted to dominate a marketplace.
Right.
They wanted to be number one, but they ideally wanted to have 50-60% market share. And they wanted some strong competitor to keep them on their toes,
Keep them growing.
keep them focused on maximizing the value to customers. So I think that was a healthy competition. In the high-tech world, I have some strong opinion about Microsoft. They're very competitive, and I think they're so competitive that they've had adverse impact on the high-tech industry. I think it's balancing out. Their market share is diminishing on the desktop and definitely diminishing on the server and the internet. But I think if they had been around 50-60% share and say Apple had 20-30% share, I think we'd have much better products.
Yes.
Much more user-friendly, much more efficient. And, because they dominate, especially on the desktop, so much that they can get away with what we call bloatware. They keep making their products bigger and bigger, and so everybody in the industry follows the trend, and you make them bigger and bigger so they can charge more money for the software. Meanwhile, you've got 10,000 features in Microsoft Word you have no idea how to use. You just want to put some text in there and have it look nice. And I think that's the adverse impact of excessive competition.
Got it.
Microsoft is, in one of my white papers I talk about their core values are fear, control, and paranoia.
Oh, wow.
Those are negative values. And,
Sure.
and they don't work out well, and they're not working out well for them, and they're starting to try to be a little bit more humble and wake up. And then, again, in high tech, I would say Apple is Microsoft competes, I think Apple inspires. So I think that balance is competition with inspiration.
Yes.
And then this kind of bring in the questions around patents and trademarks and copyrights. Because I actually think that those do a disservice to our economy.
Right.
Because what you want is the free flow of ideas.
Yeah.
But that was a little bit of a digression.
Intellectual property rights discussion. In a strategic alliance, do both companies need to practice spiritual principles in order for the thing to really fly? Do I need the other guy to be on the same page?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a lot like, I read one time, and I think there's a lot of analogy and metaphor between relationships between companies and relationships between people. And I heard
intimate relationship.
Yeah, any kind of relationship, but yeah, especially intimate relationships, because I think a marriage counselor or an alliance manager is very much like a marriage counselor.
All right.
If they're doing their job, the couple doesn't even know what's going on. If it fails, it's the alliance manager's fault. But on the topic of enlightenment, I heard one time, how many people does it take to have an enlightened or intimate relationship? Just one.
Yep.
It's nice if the other person wakes up. It may actually be nicer if they don't, because then that is a challenge to you to really be clear about your spiritual practices.
Yeah.
And how do you bring love into the relationship? How do you bring the idea of service? And how do you bring trust in a relationship where there may not be much trust?
Yes.
And if you want to make a difference, is it better off bringing water into the desert? Is it better off, being in a relationship where the other side isn't enlightened, isn't awake, isn't receptive to the ideas? Because then you can actually make more impact, have a bigger difference.
And what's the evidence base for this? Because at some level, I feel like there's been a shift in society. So if we now talk about win-win, we talk about networking, we talk about empowering people, we're talking about democratic workplaces, we're talking about the end of command and control, and I think there's an emerging core of people who would say, yeah, that's cool. For the person who's very interested in the bottom line and the competitive aspect of business, does this improve that? And how do we know?
I think that's, to some degree, still needs to be proven. You could also take that whole idea of prove. Can I prove this? No. I think if somebody wants to prove this, they try it out. That's
The kind of experiential proof in the
Well, yeah, that's what people always say about spiritual stuff. I can't prove to you that oneness and love and staying in the moment are beneficial. Try it out and see. But for me, I mean, what happened in the last 2 years at HP was inheriting an alliance that people had tried to do for 2 or 3 years prior.
Yeah.
And said, can't work. We've tried this. This is impossible. And, you know, I think through the practice of these, so when I went to Germany, I had an explicit focus to understand spiritual principles and strategic alliances. There was part of me that said, if I just meditate, then maybe I'm going to get some stone tablets that are going to say, okay, here's the answer. Here are the 10 commandments for how you do this in alliances. What I got was something better than that, which was a situation that required me to live this.
Yes.
And so it was an impossible alliance that people said couldn't be done. SAP threw us out and then brought us in, threw the rest of HP out, brought us in. We went through a year and a half of executive level discussion.
Yep.
And within that time was 9 months of formal contract negotiation.
Heavy.
It was a roller coaster. People said, oh my God, this has to happen. This can't happen. What if this happened? It's not going to happen. I mean, we got to shut it down. No, we got to make it happen. We made it happen. And I was to the point where it was not trying to make it happen, allowing it to happen.
Yes.
And it was, it was a closed deal. It was announced. As you said at the introduction, it was valued between $300 and $500 million. So accomplishing the impossible is proof in my life that these things work.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's an encouragement for people to try them out themselves.
Try it out.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.